Good morning, guys. Welcome to my channel. Today is day 2 and we are in Ahmednagar, and right now we are in Tank Museum. So it's been past more than 1 hour and we haven't finished half of this place. There is lot of tanks here and a lot of histories here. So we'll go through it, go through the video, and we'll get back to you again. Cavalry Tank Museum. Checked out of the hotel as today's plan was to cover the remaining places and ride back home. Started towards the museum. On the way itself could see many tanks placed for display on the roadside, as most of the places are under army. And we are not allowed to access few roads due to army restrictions. The place where we stayed was not far from this museum, so it didn't take much time to reach there. At the entry, you have to show your photo ID card and enter. From the place where we have to show our ID card, from there till the entrance of the museum itself, you will find few tanks on display with a board mentioning its details placed close to it. Clicked few photos and moved ahead and parked the bike. Went to the ticket counter and got the tickets, which was 20 rupees for adults. On the ticket itself, it is mentioned as this is the only tank museum in Asia. Felt proud and was waiting to see those tanks. Before going to this place, I read few reviews that this place takes around 2 hours to see, so I was eager what this place has. Kept the riding jackets, gloves, helmets in the ticket counter and went inside to explore. While entering, you can see a series of flags on both sides. There are boards which mentions history of this museum and history of tanks. Finally started the exploration. Topaz Amphibious APC. Topaz or OT-62 Obrany Transporter 62 was developed by Czechoslovakia and Poland and is equivalent to Soviet BTR-50 PK APCs. OT-62 enters service with Czechoslovakia in 1964 and with Poland in 1966. BTR-60 PB. It was first appeared in 1965 as the third modification in the BTR-60P series of the APCs developed by the Russians after the useful experience of wheeled APCs in the Second World War. BTR stands for Bron Transporter, which means armored transporter. These were employed widely by Soviet Army and also by more than 30 export customers including India. APC Scott. APC Scott or OT-64A is the basic member of Scott series. OT-64 was jointly developed by Czechoslovakia and Poland in 1959 and entered into service in 1964. Since then, it was widely exported outside the Warsaw Pact countries. APC Scott was in service with Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Iraq, Libya, Sudan, Syria, Uganda and India. M3A1 reconnaissance vehicle. The M2A1 with radio and other modification was standardized as the M3 Scout car in 1936. The vehicle, powered by a Hercules JXD 6-cylinder engine, had a four-wheel drive and was capable of 55 miles per hour on road. The landing vehicle track was intended primarily for use in flood relief operations and rescue of crashed aircraft. The LVTs were provided to the British Army during the World War II and supplied post-war to France, Italy and Spain, among others. .8 cm Flak 18, designed by the Krupp team in Sweden to circumvent the Versailles Treaty. The Flak 18 became the most famous gun of the Second World War. Originally designed as an anti-aircraft mount, the 88 assumed a wonder weapon status as an anti-tank gun in the North African campaign. Rolls-Royce armored car. It was the most successful of all the armored cars built on existing commercial chassis in the early days of the World War I. A simple body of thin sheet metal was built onto a silver ghost car chassis. It became the most widely used armored car in the World War I and saw action in France, Egypt, East Africa, Russia, guerrilla warfare in Arabia, and for internal security duties in India in 1945. Schwerer Panzerspar-Wagen 8 RAD. SDKFZ 232 armored car was the most powerful and best known model used by German army throughout the World War II, some 1255 being in use. Coventry Mark I. Coventry, a British armoured car, generally similar to the Daimler but larger, was produced in 1944. At the end of World War II, the production was stopped. A few were, however, used by the French army in the Indochina in 1955. M8 light armored car. The US M8 light armored car, called Greyhound by the British, was developed by the Ford Motor Company. At the end of 1943, the American light armored car came into existence and a total of 8,523 were built between 1942 and 1953. Armored car Mk1 Fox 1. The Foxhound was built in 1942, was the Canadian equivalent of the Humber Mk3 armored car. This version had a greater width than any of the British Humbers and was also slightly heavier with more powerful engine. Hull and the turret were made by the Hamilton Bridge Co. and mounted on General Motors rear-engine chassis. Centurion Mk7 main battle tank. The tank entered service with the British Army in 1949 and was replaced in 1967 by the Chieftain MBT. 16 countries apart from India have used the 4000 produced Centurions. Valentine Infantry Tank Mark III. The Desert Valentine gained a great reputation for reliability. Reportedly, some motored over 3,000 miles on tracks following the 8th Army. Valentines were also used in Madagascar, the Arakan, which is Burma, and at Gibraltar. By 1944, Valentine had been superseded as a gun tank, but the hull and the chassis were used in a wide variety of specialist vehicles. PT-76 Light Amphibious Tank. The PT-76 Plavoshi tank was based on the Penguin cross-country vehicle. It entered service with the Russian Army in 1952. This tank was imported by India in 1965 and saw intense action in Bangladesh in 1971. Infantry Tank Mark II Matilda A12. The 7th RTR of the British Army was the first unit to be equipped with this tank and gave a good account of itself in the retreat to Dunkirk. This was one of the most famous British tanks of World War II, forming a major part of the British Armed Forces during the 8th Army battles in the Western Desert. AMX-13 light tank. It was used as a tank destroyer or reconnaissance vehicle and served as a light tank in the French Army. The tank entered the service with the French Army in 1953-54 and in 25 other countries including India. This was the first tank to have an oscillating turret. This tank served in 2 regiments of the Indian Army till 1970 and then with reconnaissance squadrons. It was feared and known as the jumping jack by the enemy in the 1965 Indo-Pak War. It was employed in Chushul and Nathula in Sikkim and saw a very active service in Kemkaran and Chamb in the 1965 war and again in Chamb Jaurian in 1971. A-22 Churchill Infantry Tank Mark VII. It was used on most of the European battlefields. The time they were in action was the Dye Parade in August 1942 and later in Alamein, Tunisia and Italy. This tank was used by Russia, India and Jordan. A9 Cruiser Tank Mark I. This tank was designed for large maneuvers and deep strike for the British Army of 1930s. This tank replaced some of the aging Vickers Medium Mark II in British service. The first A9s were issued to the 1st Armored Division, which took them to France in 1939-40 and left practically all of them at Dunkirk. Sherman Duplex Drive. It was developed for the Normandy landings in 1944. The revolutionary duplex drive designed by Nicholas Stroessler in 1942-43 could make 30-ton tanks to swim through water. M41 Walker Bulldog Light Tank. The standard light tank in use with the Indian Army at the end of World War II was the M24 Chaffee. M41 also saw service with the Pakistan and a host of other countries worldwide. This tank was captured during the 1965 Indo-Pak War. M48 Medium Pattern Tank. M48 Medium Tank Pattern entered service with the US Army in 1953 and its production stopped in the 1960s. The Pakistanis lost almost 100 M48 in Punjab in the 1965 Indo-Pakistan campaign. This is one of them. M24 Chaffee Light Tank. It entered the US service in 1944 and was supplied to many countries including UK. This tank was employed by Allies in Europe and North Africa during the World War II. T-54 Main Battle Tank. It enters service with the Russian Army in 1950. The tank can create its own smoke screen and can ford up to a depth of 18 feet using a snorkel. This tank was one of the first of the Soviet Union tanks to be inducted into the Indian Army. It has seen action in Fazilka during the 1971 Indo-Pak War. Sherman. With With about 50,000 produced in all versions, the Sherman was the most widely produced tank during World War II. Vijayanta. This is the first indigenously produced Indian tank and was modelled on the Valiant series of tanks designed by Vickers Limited, UK. The Vijayanta was revolutionary in design for its power pack and transmission, and unequalled for the accuracy and consistency of its 105 mm gun. Carden-Lloyd Universal Carrier T-16. It was developed in 1939 for a long line of infantry carriers of similar zone. 74,000 of such were produced in UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand and US, where it was called as T-16. Production ceased in 1945 and the vehicle remained in service until the early 1950s. M3 Half-Track APC. It entered service with the US Army in 1941 and were also used by Britain, France, Soviet Union, Netherlands, and was in long service with the Israeli Defense Force. Carrier Armored Wheeled IP Mark II. The Canadian 3-ton 4x4 chassis was used for several of these types of armored vehicles. This carrier was used in World War II in all theatres where Indian troops participated. There were 6 versions of this vehicle and some 4,655 were produced. Carrier Armored Vehicle IP. This version of the Indian pattern Ford 4x4 armored wheeled carrier had a turret. The main supplier of the military vehicles to the British other than US was Canada. Vehicles produced in Australia, India, South Africa, New Zealand, etc. were almost invariably of Canada origin. Humber Mark IV armored car. It entered service with the British Army in 1941 and was phased out shortly after World War II. It was used by many countries including India, Burma, Ceylon, Cyprus and Mexico. Sherman Beach Armored Recovery Vehicle BARV. A large number of indigenous special purpose conversions were produced on the Sherman chassis for service in the British Army. This Sherman BARV was one of such conversion. It was a towing vehicle only. The winch was omitted by simplifying the conversion and shortened the production time. Valentine Bridge Layer. It was the first of the British bridge layer tanks of the Second World War. It was mainly used for training as it was replaced for operational use by the Churchill Bridge Layer in 1943-44. Churchill Bridge Layer. It was one of the most important British tanks of 1939-45, as it was adaptable to specialized armored roles needed for invasion of Europe in 1944. The vehicle's roomy interior, regular shape and heavy armor made it particularly useful as an armed bridge layer. This bridge layer remained in service in the British Army until the early 1960s, till replaced by the Centurion bridge layer. Churchill ARV Mark I, produced in 1944 and used by 79 Armored Division during the Second World War. This ARV remained in service for many years after World War II. Sherman Crab Flail Tank. It was developed by the British to clear a path through minefields and was used by 79 Armored Division in 1944-45 in Europe. Centaur Dozer. The Centaur Dozer was one of the variants of the Centaur cruiser tank Mark 8 A27L. The Centaur tank was developed by Leyland Motors Limited. A Liberty V12 engine with a matching Merit Brown transmission was fitted to it. M22 Light Tank Locust Airborne Tank. The weight of this tank was kept low at 8 tons to be carried in aircraft. It has a 162 bhp Lycoming petrol engine which could move up to 40 miles per hour. A handful of these tanks accompanied the British 6th Airborne Division during the Rhine crossings of 24th March 1945. M3 Grant Medium Tank. The M3 series was evolved from the M2 medium tank, weighing 28 tons. It was powered by Wright Continental R975 EC2 9-cylinder air-cooled petrol engine, developing 340 bhp and road speed of 26 miles per hour. M3A3 American light tank, known as Stuart Mk5, entered service with the US Army in 1941 and was used by the British and other Allied forces during the Second World War. The Indian Army employed this tank in Zojila, Srinagar Valley, Nowshera and Nagaland. M3A3 light tank Stuart. Grand Canal Defense Light CDL. The Grand CDL was the Grand tank retaining its 75 mm gun, thus keeping an offensive role. Had the searchlight enclosed in an armored housing which included a ball-mounted MG in the front face. The searchlight contained a 13 million candle power ARC light and a special reflector together with a stroboscopic shutter. Type 97 Chiha medium tank. It entered service with the Japanese Army in 1938 and continued in service till 1945. It was also used by China after World War II. Type 95HA Geo light tank. It entered service with the Japanese Army in 1935 and remained in service till 1945. The Type 95 was used by the cavalry and the infantry and saw action in China, Burma, and Pacific Islands in World War II. Archer self-propelled anti-tank gun. The 17-pounder anti-tank British gun was capable of defeating most German tanks of World War II. Sexton self-propelled gun. It was the conversion of the ram tank to mount the British 25-pounder field gun howitzer. The Sexton was in use since 1944. It served with the British Army until the mid-1950s and was also used by the Canadian, Indian, Italian, Portuguese and South African armies. Car Scout Mark III Lynx 1. It was the Canadian equivalent to the British Daimler Dingo, but was heavier and fitted with more powerful engine. The International Harvester Company built hull was mounted on the Canadian 3-ton 4x4 chassis. On the museum's memory hall It is where the housing of souvenirs of all regiments of Indian Army Armored Corps are kept, and there is around 2 to 3 such halls here. Hall number 1. Hall number 2. Hall number 3. After going through all the armored vehicle and the tank one by one, I found out that I had actually spent 4 hours inside. Even though I was there for 4 hours, I could hardly find any visitors there, and this point was completed, so had some refreshments at the shop close to the ticket counter and left for the next destination.